We're now going to give an introduction to the 5 areas of Kilaim. Kilaim of garments, which is known as shatnus, and this stands for Sheva Tovi V'nois, which means spun, woven and cross-woven. And then you've got Kilaim of crop, which includes vegetables and legumes. However, when we are determining what's the same species and what's not the same species, we have to be very careful because we have to follow the biological species system of Chazal rather than that of botanists worldwide, as there are differences between the two. Kilaim of the vineyard. This includes the grapevine, not the olive vine. To whom and where does this apply? This applies to Jews in Israel by Torah law. However, due to it being the only form of Kilaim that one may not have any benefit from whatsoever, the Tanaim applied it to the diaspora as well, however with certain leniencies. See future videos for an elaboration on this. Although theoretically speaking, Kilaim of the vineyard never applies to non-Jews, in practice in Israel it does apply to non-Jews who are supplying Jews with grapes. However, it is the non-Jews clientele that creates the requirement rather than it being a requirement in its own right. See future videos for an elaboration on how this does or does not apply to non-Jewish suppliers in the diaspora. Now we're going to deal with Kilaim of animals, which Kilaim of animals includes the mating of 2 species and also ploughing with 2 species or leading a chariot with 2 species. However, you have to understand the practical definition of mating, excluding genetic modification or engineering, is either by physically forcing one species of animal to mate with another, or by putting 2 species of animal into what Jewish law defines as a pen. However, even in the time of the Sanhedrin, you would only get the 39 lashes for forcing them one species onto the other, not for putting them into the same pen. For putting them into the same pen, you would only get Makis Marodus. It applies to Jews in Israel and the diaspora. However, whether it applies to non-Jews is questionable. And even if it does not apply to non-Jews, it could be that genetic modification, genetic engineering is forbidden for other reasons. See special features for an elaboration on this. Then you've got Kilaim of trees, which is grafting of one species of fruit tree onto another. Kilaim of trees is a fruit tree onto a non-fruit tree is only forbidden because of Sofik Daraisa Luchum, as we do not know which fruit it produced before the Chet or the Mauritian. To whom and where does Kilaim of trees apply? It applies to Jews in Israel and the diaspora, and to non-Jews it's questionable again whether it is an additional prohibition on top of the 7 commandments or not. However, even if it is not applicable to non-Jews, genetic engineering could be forbidden for other reasons, and see special features for an elaboration on this. However, it's important to note that we have to follow the biological species system of Chazal and not of botanists worldwide, as there are differences. When is a byproduct of grafting forbidden to grow or maintain? It is only the original graft that is forbidden. However, hardwood cuttings, etc. are permitted. See special features in future and later videos for an elaboration on this. Word of caution. This is only the first video in the series, and is only a brief introduction to this complex subject with many disputes as to exactly what the different plants and animals are mentioned in Chazal. And the disputes include also the commentators on the 4 books of Jewish law known as the Shulchan Aruch. It is important to note that there's a fifth book of Jewish law known as common sense, and you must use this to analyze the rules laid down by Chazal to determine whether certain cases that are not mentioned in Chazal are permitted or not. I will elaborate on this in future videos. Please remember to watch the special features, the end. The difference between genetic engineering and genetic modification. The erroneous misuse of these terms. Genetic engineering is what most people mistakenly call genetic modification. Genetic engineering is the high-tech methods used in recent decades to incorporate genes directly into an organism. The only way scientists can transfer genes from organisms that are not sexually compatible is to use combined DNA techniques that are not found in nature. Grafting is an ancient definition of genetic engineering. The only recorded case of genetic engineering as defined in modern science in nature is in Bereshis Rabbah 28:8, where Rebbe Lulinai Bar Tavrin, in the name of Rebbe Yitzchok, tells us that after the Dar HaMabul, before the actual Mabul, when they planted wheat, then Hashem did what we now know as genetic engineering, not genetic modification, i.e. there was a complete genetic change and it produced darnel, hence the Hebrew name Zainin, which comes from the word Zanus. This was a special punishment measure for measure, and that is why we are not as healthy as we were before the Dar HaMabul. Genetic modification is when we deliberately select plants for increased yield and pest resistance, as well as overall quality. The only difference is that this happens naturally in the wild. In modern terms, this also includes grafting, as genetic engineering is only called genetic engineering if two trees cannot be grafted in the normal way without interfering with the genes on a molecular level. The dangers of modern genetic engineering. Note the erroneous use of genetic modification in the video. We must now interrupt with a short video.
Let's say you want to create a corn plant that produces its own pesticide. So you take the gene from the soil bacterium Bt, and you make millions of copies of the gene, and you put it into a gun, and you shoot that gun into a plate of millions of cells, hoping that some of the genes make it into the DNA of some of those cells. Then you clone those cells into a plant. Now the process of insertion plus cloning causes massive collateral damage in the DNA of the plant. 2 to 4% is different. There can be hundreds or thousands. The fact that genes transfer to our gut bacteria gets worse when you think of what can transfer. The corn and cotton that are genetically engineered, there's varieties that produce their own pesticide. So if the gene that produces the pesticide transfers, it might turn our intestinal bacteria into living pesticide factories.
Is genetic engineering included in Kilaim? If not, if it is not forbidden, if not, is it forbidden anyway? Is it be anyway because of avodah zarah or ritzicha or geneva hezek, geneva stas? Genetic engineering nowadays. Why may we plant or eat genetic engineered crop or drink genetically engineered milk not from Belgian blue or eat GM meat or poultry? It's because of Eis Lasus Lashem Eferu Teresecha, which means at the time of need, for the sake of the Torah, we must break one law to maintain the Torah as a whole. Since genetic engineering is so widespread nowadays, if we were to be concerned with trying to obtain truly organic crops, or meat or poultry and eggs, or even fish, we would be so busy that we would have no time whatsoever to learn Torah, and the Torah would be forgotten altogether. Do we need to come on to Eis Lasos in the first place? And why not? Avodah zarah. Only the original act of changing the genetics on a molecular level can be called avodah zarah, ritzicha or suicide. Ritzicha is only if you are doing the act of ritzicha, not if the person eating it is doing it. Suicide is only forbidden because of v'chai for the 613 mitzvahs v'yidin or the 7 mitzvahs b'nei noach v'nochrim, since it is not going to be bohem if we are careful about genetic engineering. Therefore it is permitted, or is that the din of Eis Lasos?
Between the halachic definition of murkuv by Esrog and the halachic definition of murkuv by Kilaim, as far as Isakim is concerned, is that by an Esrog a ben murkuv is also possible because it's got to be an Esrog. However, by Kilaim there is only an Isakim on an original graft, not on a tree which is a byproduct of that, e.g. hardwood cuttings.
I'm Stephen with AlbertaUrbanGarden.ca. On last week's episode, we spoke about building your own urban orchard and how to fill your yard or your patio, balcony, or deck with many fruit and nut producing perennials. Near the end of that video, I spoke about how you can add different varieties to your garden without actually having to add another plant, and that's through a process called grafting. On today's video, I'm going to take you through a collection of scions and grafting those different varieties to your perennial trees. More and more common in garden centers is combination trees. These are trees that come with a number of varieties already grafted to them, and you can simply take them home and plant them and have 4 or 5 varieties on your apple tree. The only limitation to that is that they do cost a little bit more because someone is putting in that effort and time, and you don't get to pick the varieties that you may want. So what I've done is I've planted varieties of apple trees that I very much enjoy, and then I've gone through a process to find other varieties to graft to these parent trees. You can graft to most fruit and nut trees fairly successfully. In fact, you can even graft within families. For instance, if you wanted to graft a pear to this apple tree, you'd likely be successful. The only time that you can't graft is when you're trying to cross families. For instance, I probably wouldn't be able to get a successful graft of a cherry onto my apple tree. Before we move on to the method, I would like to define a few things. The tree you are starting with is considered the rootstock, whereas the wood you are grafting to it is called a scion. You can graft any fruit tree. However, if given the opportunity, I would wait at least a year or 2 to let the tree settle into its new home. A tree that's settled will take a graft just a little bit better, improving your chances for success. Unfortunately, this Honeycrisp tree here that I've just planted this spring had some damage on a couple of the branches, so I've decided to fix that damage using grafting. In order to find varieties that I'd like to graft to my own trees, I've been going around to apple trees that my friends have and trying their apples out. If you're just starting out learning to graft, for the best chance of success, pick apple trees that grow in your local area. That way, when you graft them to your tree, you'll make sure that they're hardy enough to live in your zone. After you have settled on the variety that you would like to graft to your tree, it's time to collect the scion wood. The best time to do this is when the plant is still dormant in the spring. You will want to collect wood that is less than a year old. Generally, these are branches that are less than the diameter of a pencil. I collected mine in mid-March, just after the snow had melted, but before the buds had begun to swell. I look for scions with limited to no side branching, and that are straight. Scion wood is fairly simple to store. You want to prevent it from getting warm and drying out, so I put them in Ziploc bags in the crisper drawer in my refrigerator. When taking them out, I make sure to keep them cool until I've actually grafted them to the tree. There are plenty of tools out there for grafting. When I am grafting, I use the following tools: a sharp pair of shears, grafting wax, lighter, flagging tape, pen, a sharp utility knife, and grafting tape. Depending on the techniques you use, you may also need a fine-tooth saw. There are plenty of grafting techniques out there, including whip, side, cleft, bud, and bridge grafts. Before I do any grafting, I like to make sure that I've done a refresher on my research just to make sure I have my technique down. Sites like the University of Minnesota do a great job outlining the methods. The best time to graft is when the rootstock tree is just leafing out in the spring. This time is ideal as the sap is running and filled with nutrients that will help speed the healing process. Any time before or after may result in a higher chance that the graft will fail. When grafting to a smaller rootstock, a cleft graft is the simplest method that I have found to be successful. Start by pruning the rootstock. Make sure the cut is clean and there is no tears in the outer layer of the wood. This layer is the cambium layer and is where all the magic happens. Take out your scion wood and find the lower end. Buds point in the direction that they are going to grow. It is important to graft them the same way as they were on the plant. If not, the plant physiology will prevent the graft from working. Cut the last 2 or 3 centimeters or 1 inch, as this is the area that during storage in your fridge may already be damaged or dead. Cut the top off as well, making sure that you have 3 to 4 good looking buds on your scion. Cut the scion wood so that it forms a wedge. It is important that the top of the wedge starts at the same place on both sides. Judge the distance down the rootstock the wedge will fit and slowly cut down the center of the branch. Rocking it back and forth slowly will help prevent tearing and keep the cut nice and clean. I usually cut just past where the wedge will fit. It is now time to put the scion wood in the rootstock. Slowly and carefully pry open the cut using your knife and insert the scion. Again, slowly rock the scion further into the rootstock. You will want to line up the cambium layer on both sides if possible. Once you are happy with the location of the graft, it's time to seal it up. The goal is not only to secure the graft, but much like a cut on yourself, to protect the wound from infection until it can heal. In order to secure and seal my new grafts, I've used this grafting tape. This grafting tape will last just long enough for the graft to take, and then the tape itself will decay, allowing the graft to bulge out and to continue to grow. You can use other tapes such as electrical tape or really any tape available. However, during the growing season, you're going to have to watch the grafting point. When it begins to bulge, you want to make a slight incision in the tape, allowing it to release that pressure. If you have a large wound, you can use grafting wax to seal the wound as well. I like to use it on the tip of my scion wood to help prevent the scion from drying out. I heat up the wax using a lighter as it makes it easier to apply. Bud grafting is another method that is very common to add new varieties to your existing fruit trees. You simply notch out a bud and replace it with a desired bud from your scion wood. This is often preferred because it causes less damage and integrates seamlessly. Once you're done grafting, as I am for the year, it's time to wait and see. Often it takes a number of weeks to see any new growth on your scion wood, as you've extended the dormancy period by clipping this off while it was dormant and putting it in your fridge. Most grafts will take a few years to get strong enough to produce flowers and fruit. Usually the minimum amount of time is between 2 to 3 years. It is important to label the graft locations. What works well is flagging tape and a pen. Alternatively, you can always enjoy the surprise later. You will be able to enjoy many more years of more than one variety on one tree. Grafting is not only a lot of fun and a very cost-effective way to add new varieties to your garden, but it increases your pollination of things like apple trees by having more than one variety in close proximity for those pollinators. And some of these varieties, although they flower at the same time, they produce in different times in the season. For instance, my Harcourt apple produces in mid to late August, whereas my Honeycrisp apple will produce in late September. This allows me to stagger out my harvests, further enjoying my orchard.
It is very important to know the halachic borders of Eretz Yisrael, Syria, Eva Yarden, Bovel and Mitzrayim, as there are nafkaminas ledina as to what applies where. As there are sholosh artzes l'shvius and eis, and the same applies to all mitzvahs hataluyos ba'aretz. Also, I am not going into the borders of Bovel because it is very unclear nowadays what the halachic borders of Bovel are. And the Bovel is not really nageh nowadays. And v'hamevin yovin. Important to note that it is not so clear where the halachic borders of Mitzrayim are. However, what is clear is that the northern border goes past is from the left-hand side of the map definitely up until Alexandria, and it is questionable which point of the two ends of the Nile within the square is the original starting point of the Nile, and therefore it is questionable how far along that border goes. And then the border, again, it's questionable within that square where the eastern border starts. And the eastern border follows all the way down to Khartoum, which is Khartoum. And then with the southern border, it is questionable as to the exact shape of the border. And the western border of Mitzrayim is unknown. The borders of Eretz Yisrael are clearly marked out on this map. And I will also include a PDF of both maps in order for you to print them off and use for reference.